This is Hot Science. I'm Richard Clarke with the week's top news in science, technology, and medicine. Thank you for joining me. Now, let me review the top stories for the week and then we'll get into them. Uh, the top story, one that many people are following closely, is on Twitter. This one is a headline from a few days ago. Twitter closes offices after Elon Musk's loyalty oath sparks waves of resignations. So Elon Musk is making an impact at Twitter, it looks like, and we'll see how that goes. The technology story is a story of the intersection between AI and the creative endeavors. It's when AI can make art. What does it mean for creativity? Then a couple of environmental stories. The first is on the world's failure to deliver climate action in 5 handy dandy charts. And the next is climates create an artificial photosynthesis system that is 10 times more efficient than existing systems. It's still a big problem, though, and even 10 times more efficient isn't enough yet. In materials, the story is on thermoelectric materials, and a team has created new crystals that can generate electricity from heat. And in space, the story for this week has got to be the NASA's blast off with the Artemis 1 mission and putting a capsule around the moon for the first time in 50 years. And in biology, I have yet another story about the mental performance of animals. And here it is crows perform yet another skill once thought to be distinctly human. I know when I was in India, there were crows everywhere, and I thought the crows knew everything. And the human story is that the brain has doubled in power suddenly about 200,000 years ago. And the question is why? The answer that some people have is interesting, and we'll talk about it. It was those mushrooms they were finding around on the cow plots. And the last story is a health and medical story. And it turns out, contrary to what I've been reading for my whole life now the latest study says that red meat is not a health risk. And a new study slams years of shoddy research. And so let us proceed with the stories. And hello there, John and Andrew. Glad to see you. Okay, so for the first story, it's about Twitter. And, under Elon Musk last week, Twitter closed offices around the world. And now his tech company is struggling hard to retain workers after Musk demanded employees sign a pledge to work long hours at high intensity. Of course, this was after he already laid off half of uh, the workers, and now it turns out he's struggling to maintain staff. And after his announcement about to stay with the company, you have to work long hours at high intensity. It looks like he will have lost another 1,000 workers or so. And so, in the few weeks that he's taken over Twitter, he has lost at least 2/3 of his workers. I made the comment that I think maybe Musk is not a people guy, and maybe that's the way it is. The departures, of course, include many engineers who are responsible for fixing bugs and preventing services outages. He also told people no more working from home. That reduced them further. And now users are speculating that Twitter could go down in a matter of hours or days. And if it does break, there's no one left to fix things in a lot of areas. Here is a quote from a worker who refused or declined Musk's opportunity to come work long hours for little recognition. He said, "If I stayed, I would have been on call constantly with little support for an indeterminate amount of time on several additional complex systems that I had no experience in." So that does not seem very desirable to me. I know a lot of these kind of tech guys, and they pride themselves on knowing what they're doing. And so being in that kind of situation where you're constantly on call to fix problems in systems that you don't know about is not very attractive. And meanwhile, Musk, of course, says Twitter usage was at an all-time high, so he must be successful from that standard. I've heard reports that it's this all-time high Twitter usage is kind of like people standing around watching a train wreck, so they're interested in keeping up with it. One part of the issues that are not talked about in this story is it turns out that Musk does not believe in advertising. And Twitter, 90% of Twitter's income is from advertising. And now with the breakup of the content moderation that was being done at Twitter, more than half of the advertisers have quit Twitter because they don't want their ad running side by side with some piece of hate speech. And so it's not only his employees that are leaving in droves, it's his advertisers that are leaving in droves. And I just want to ask you guys, will Twitter crash, do you think? And if it does, how long is it going to take? What do you think?
Twitter has over 3,000 employees, and what Musk has done is the same thing that he did when he took over Tesla. The man is not a very nice man, but he's not a fool. He's very bright.
But he doesn't know everything.
I believe they started off with 7,500 employees when he took
Right,
over.
they had 7,500, they're down to about 2,500 now.
I hope this doesn't affect Tesla because I have a car.
Well-
I do think that the Twitter will crash because, the employees feel uncertain about their future. And besides, they feel like they're being abused. So they're going to be looking around, and I have a feeling that there are a lot of Twitter-like offspring will happen. But Twitter itself, I think, is going down the tubes.
Well, when Musk took over Tesla, it was in exactly the same situation. It
Yeah,
had
but-
an oversupply of workers and was going bankrupt. Every month is losing money.
I think Twitter was not losing money for one. And
Yes, Twitter was losing money,
Right,
well,
Twitter was losing money,
big
yes.
bucks.
oh, well. Yeah, well.
And people wrote off Musk when he was running SpaceX back in 1998 when it started. And now they're the premium outfit for getting stuff into orbit. And so I don't think people should discount the guy. He's very clever, but admittedly, he's got other things that aren't working out, like his tunneling operation. We haven't heard much about it.
And Neuralink is crashing.
And then that home power backup batteries don't seem to be making
Right.
much headway.
And his
But,
solar roofs also, looks like he's getting out of that business.
And he's been married 3 times and divorced 3 times, twice with the same woman. So I mean,
Okay.
he's not clever in every area.
Yeah, anyway,
In
usually,
procreation, Andrew, in procreation, he's very effective.
Yeah, I think he's
He
got
has
9
fathered
kids.
a lot of children.
Yeah.
again, to me, one kind of question is in the case of Tesla and SpaceX, he was been able to do something to generate income. And in the case of Twitter, getting rid of his primary income sources isn't very good for the success of a business. And having the customers run away because he doesn't like advertisers is
Well, one of the
a
things
problem.
they say about his business philosophy, it's to go for commercialization first and improvement second.
Uh-huh.
And like his um, robots that we were making fun of a couple of weeks ago, because they're not as acrobatic as the Boston Dynamics ones. The thing is, he wants to make millions of them and sell them for less than $20,000 each to do mundane chores in old folks' homes and that sort of thing. They don't need to do backflips to do the kind of work that he plans for them. And also, they're using, in the case of the robots, they're using the artificial intelligence that they've pioneered with the self-driving cars to make those robots learn on the job. And so you could expect that the more they distribute them, the better they're going to get.
And I was impressed that the actuators used in the robot, that a single actuator could lift 500 pounds.
Mhm.
That's
So I don't think
something
we should
Boston Dynamics hasn't even vaguely approached.
Yeah, we shouldn't write off Elon too soon, but we should keep watching him, that's certain. And the other thing that's worth, I think, noting is the Guardian they delight in the failures of successful people. Like one of the things the Guardian has instructed their journalists to do now, they're not allowed to talk about climate change. They're instructed to call it either the climate crisis or the climate catastrophe. They don't allow their people to use any other words when they're talking about climate issues.
Now, when you're talking about the Guardian being a critical source of Elon Musk, I read a lot of things, and I guarantee you it's not just the Guardian. That's just the article I picked up. I could have picked up 100 different articles that said similar things. So it's not just those evil lefties that are after Musk.
But one thing that nobody has mentioned about Twitter is there's one person that's more advanced in AI than anybody else in the world. And that will obviate the necessity for a lot of Twitter workers.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly that's one of the things that I hear about within the readership about Twitter, that Musk is going to somehow apply his AI skills to contact moderation, and then he won't need those people.
I have a question. Who of us have a Twitter account?
I'm
Raise your
sorry.
hand.
I'm sorry.
Who of us has a Twitter account?
I do, but I do not to read stuff. I still publish things several times a week on the internet, and I just use it as one of my PR places.
I also have a Twitter account, but I'm not active on it because I started up and I just decided this wasn't a social media that I wanted to be a part of. It's really more for the younger generations, I think.
Uh-huh. And I also, 2 weeks ago, I had 4 Twitter accounts. Now I have 1.
I just have one.
Don't they similarly say Facebook is fading? Or what's
Yes,
the,
well, all of these things with social media are going through immense changes as the generations change. And Facebook nowadays they consider is for old people like us. Now, one of the things that's interesting also, as I read, there are lots of people talking, even on Twitter, about what are the alternative to Twitter. And they speak of many different ones. One name that comes up now is Mastodon. There is one thing that has not come up in any of the discussions that I've heard, and that is the metaverse, speaking about Facebook. And so while other platforms are attracting lots of users, still the metaverse is not. So the metaverse may be wonderful, but it kind of seems like it's not time for it yet.
I believe Instagram is pretty popular.
Right? Absolutely. Of course. Among the young folk.
Yeah, like us.
That's right, like us. I love optimists. Okay, so the next story is a story of art and AI. And let me just show you some of this. So I'll lead with some. You may remember Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring. Here is a sea otter with a pearl earring. So this was created by Dolly 2. And here they, to another system, gave it the verbal commands of to make drawings of Kermit the Frog using the munch, the scream kind of motif as doing the scream. Here it's another one. It looks like a Dutch master painting of a guy sitting in an office cubicle with a keyboard. And here is another painting just to show its realistic capability. And this is a painting like a corgi, a dog on a beach. And so it can do realistic stuff too. It doesn't have to make it up. And uh, so image generators such as DALL-E 2 can produce pictures on anything you wish in seconds. And it turns out this alarms some of the creative people. And uh, the there is a concern not only for workers like artists and illustrators in that industry, but also concern in the creative industries in general. Uh, they now AI has not only entered into being able to generate these kind of high quality visual images, the AI can deal with speech and speech generation, and this large language model like GPT-3 is very effective. That's starting to be used around the world in things like customer service applications, so the computer can speak to you effectively. And then also, AI can create and improvise music. And in the case of art and music, and I also with the writing, you can tell them, I would like to create some piece of writing, say, in the style of Shakespeare, or create an image of some oranges in the way Picasso would, or things like this. And the systems can not only create these kind of images or word documents or pieces of music, but since they have been trained with all of these creative styles, they can imitate and emulate the forms of particular human creators. And now this class of AI is known as generative AI. And in general, for example, the visual stuff, once it's seen, for example, millions of pictures of dog, if you ask it to create an image for a dog, it can create a new image for a dog that wasn't in its database, and you'll recognize it as a dog. So it can be very effective. And the AI that we presently have, it still has some problems with humans. For example, it's not very good at creating hands. They'll figure out how to deal with that. Sometimes it gets the proportions wrong, and sometimes it gets confused when you ask it to do a man riding a horse, you'll get some images. And when you ask it to do a horse riding a man, you'll get some similar images. It still doesn't understand the contextual difference between those two requests. So it's still not very good. But now, with these tools, they talk about providing, the people who are trying to promote these tools anyway, talk about the supercharged creative potential whereby even novices can create arresting digital images. And again, they can do it in the style of whatever art that you want and create a pretty faithful approximation. The creatives, though, are enraged somewhat at what they consider theft of their artistic work and trademark. For example, in the image generating programs, when they train it with what they say, literally billions of images, and many of those images are copyrighted. And so there's a question here, when an AI uses a copyrighted source, how do you compensate the creator? And that's going to be an issue in a lot of other places. I saw a video of a AI singer imitating, doing something like Dolly Parton, and it seemed a lot like Dolly Parton. I think I shared that with you guys a couple of weeks ago. And the question I have, is intellectual property, creative property. Who owns the sound that sounds like Dolly Parton? It's not a small question, and they're nowhere near answer, answering that. And there are certainly now companies already that are using this kind of programming, for example, to create custom images, and they uh, sell these custom images to their clients and customers. And there is the real fear that this is going to put a whole class of creatives at risk. And these are the illustrators that do books and album covers and book covers and things like this. Why do you need people when you can tell the AI to draw the picture that you need for your ad or your book cover? And the other question that I have is still, if everyone can use AI to create technically masterful images, what happened to the creativity, and how does this work? It's going to be a confusing time that we are in. And an example here was a recent Colorado State Fair uh, exhibition. This exhibition had one of its competitions was its annual art competition. And the art competition turned out to be won by a guy who did an AI drawing. So it beat out the human artist at the Colorado State Fair. On one hand, critics said, this is no big deal. They were giving out prizes for canned fruit. So what does it mean if you got this award? The guy who got the award said, art is dead, dude. And so this shows the kind of changes that are happening in the creative endeavors with these advanced AI systems. And the question is, what happens to these kind of creative workers, and what happens to the creation in general? I'm sure people will still continue to be creative artists, but it's really going to make the problem a lot different. Maybe in the next generation, the artists that will be the most powerful are the ones who are really conceptual artists who can think of new, amazing things to tell the AI to draw.
Well, there's a lot of bogus creativity out there and a lot of bogus art creativity, like the abstract art where they just throw pails of paint onto a canvas and scrub it around and sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars to government art museums. So this is probably a good thing that this kind of creativity will be squelched.
I
And
can tell you're not married to an artist.
Yeah. Well, there's differences in art. a lot of art is repetitive technology. I mean, that's the way artists make money, is by pursuing the same techniques with different ideas.
Sure.
But
Well, there's a part of art that is like craft. And
yes,
when you are doing the repetitive thing to make product, what you're doing is craft and not art.
well, the backhoes put a lot of ditch diggers out of business, but they didn't have the same voice that these creative people have, and maybe that's a shame. I don't know.
Well, I remember something about John Henry.
Which was he? Was he the railway spike
Yeah, he was the
driver?
steel driving man.
Yeah.
So it's been going on for a while.
But an interesting thing is a lot of art only has value because of its exclusivity and its rarity.
Just like
And
money only has value because we've arbitrarily assigned it to it, and some of it is based on exclusivity, some of it is just entirely fantasy.
well, and the interesting thing about art is if it's well done, it can make you see things in a different way than you would see them looking at a pure photograph
Right.
or looking at the object. And that's the kind of creative art that we need to hang on to.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, when I was in Holland, 5, 6 weeks ago, my brother he plays piano, and he has a keyboard, and it's made by Roland, and it was a new one. And he showed me that, you get the thing started, a tune or in a certain form, and then if you quit, the thing keeps playing, and make variations on what you do, and if it comes to an end, it makes for a very nice logical ending. I mean, something that when you listen to it, you you would expect, but it's totally done by a machine. It is totally amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder though how AI would work with the so-called human subtleties. Like you tell a joke, tongue in cheek, that sort of thing. If it could figure that one out.
Now, one of the things I am sure of with all of these technologies is that a few years down the road, the kind of media and advertising we see on our computer screen will have components of it that are generated by programs like this, maybe words, maybe music, maybe images, and that it will be generated based on the advertisers' understanding of our interests and preferences. So these tools will be used for uh, commercial purposes to create it essentially unique media that is just targeted to us individually.
It's interpretive AI, you might say.
Well, that's how we're going to use it in this culture is we got to turn it into money, and that's a
Yeah.
great way to turn it into money, unless you're on Twitter.
Well, an interesting thing about AI is a lot of it was developed with next word prediction. And
Uh-huh.
what the AI stuff would do would be crawl all over the internet and millions of documents and see the word sequences. And by sort of understanding the predicted
Uh-huh.
word sequences, then they can come up with these sentences and ideas that make sense.
Uh-huh.
And we see it all the time. If you write a text message, the damn phone will get ahead of you and put the words in before you get them down there.
Sure.
It's just like the music that I was
Yeah.
experiencing in.
Now, AI is not unique in its prediction of what is next. If one of the things that they have discovered studying the brain in the last couple of years is the brain works as a prediction engine, and where what it's trying to do is to figure out what is going to happen next so it gets ready for it. And one of the ways they know that is through these brain studies, and they see when the brain sees a familiar image or what it thinks is going to be next, it doesn't work very hard. When it sees something that it doesn't expect, the brain works real hard. The brain is 2% of the human body, uses 20% of the energy, and it doesn't surprise me that the brain has mechanisms to try to optimize that, because the brain is really expensive in terms of energy use. And maybe it's like that with AI too.
Well, and with your brain, they say it's more important what you forget than what you remember. Because if you don't forget stuff, you really get clogged up.
Get overloaded. That's right. That's right. Anyway, continuing along, the next story is of charts that kind of show some of the trouble environmentally. These are more detailed ones than the usual just things of temperature. One of the areas of trouble, for example, in Africa, is that the investment in clean energy has just fallen off a cliff. And in Africa, the main fuel source in Africa is still fossil fuels. And some places like South Africa, the main power source, they're really committed to coal. And so if we don't do something with Africa, we're in trouble in a lot of places in the world. Then if you look at policies that they plan through time, the red line at the top is what countries have say they're going to do, and the yellow line at the bottom is what countries look like they're going to actually do. As usual, the performance is short of what they are committed to, and they're saying what they're committed to isn't enough to take care of the problem. Another issue, this is just over a couple of years, but it is climate tech and the early stage funding for climate tech. As you see, last year in 2021, it was climbing significantly every quarter. And now in 2022, it has been declining. So we're not making the continuing investments in new technology. Also, one of the things I noticed looking at this graph, if you look at agriculture and food, about a third of the climate emissions. But if you look at the spending in the Q3 of this year, the line is just a tiny little line. And I would hope to see more spending on areas that we know are problems, but it's not happening. Then if you look at fuel usage in the next 30 years, you do see the green lines and black lines are different kinds of fuel oil, high sulfur and low sulfur. They go from about 60% to maybe 40%. So they show those are going down somewhat over the period of the next 30 years. What you see really expanding is liquefied natural gas. And so you can see in this chart how they are projecting liquefied natural gas to take over a lot of the fuel role from the various forms of fuel oil. I guess liquid natural gas is less polluting, but it is still polluting. And so we still have changes are happening in the fuel system, but we'll still see how that goes. One problem that we have in all of this is particularly uh, fuels for marine shipping, and we don't yet have a good, clean solution for that yet, though people are trying some different things. So that just shows some of the details of issues there. And let me pass it to you guys for comments.
Well, I'd point out that what it really shows is that the Western decision makers all know how unrealistic these 2030 and 2050 targets are. And the rest of the world countries put economic development and energy usage ahead of CO2 reduction. And our decision makers just continue to spend small change on having meetings in exotic locations, and they pander to the environmental and media alarmists and just keep the voters on side. Their real-time horizons are only to the next election. But you know, that trend of the natural gas or the LNG is a really healthy trend. In the US was the only Western economy that reduced its CO2 emissions in the last 5 years. And it was entirely due to fracking and cheap natural gas that enabled, and it encouraged them to substitute natural gas for coal. And as a consequence, the US significantly reduced their CO2 emissions. And the best thing we could do to reduce CO2 emissions right now would be to increase fracking and increase the use and availability of cheap natural gas so that we could quit using coal. And of course, the longer term best prospects would be from nuclear power. And the real question we should be asking ourselves is, why are these concerned environmentalists rejecting the use of natural gas and nuclear power if CO2 really is the issue? I mean, these environmentalists are all clever people, but I just don't understand why they don't see it.
Including myself as a clever person.
Are you an environmentalist or a natural gas denier?
No, I agreed with almost everything you said. We need to substitute natural gas for coal. That's
Because it does burn cleaner, so it's a
cleaner,
good part of the.
cleaner fuel. And I think you'll find that many environmentalists are now coming around to nuclear energy. So they see that as clean. Of course, what do you do with the spent fuel is still a problem.
But that's a lot better. The new reactors are very much better than the previous generations for that.
Yes, absolutely. And if we can get fusion on the line, problem solved.
But in the meantime, the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers built a substantial system of dams in the United States to minimize flooding and provide hydroelectric power. And obviously, Pakistan and Bangladesh would benefit greatly by investment in dams.
Yeah, and you know, there was in Bangladesh just recently, there was a move to build a new fertilizer plant that would make urea fertilizer for food production using natural gas. And the environmentalists were boycotting the World Bank headquarters with placards and posters and all sorts of stuff, saying that the World Bank should not lend money to Bangladesh to build this fertilizer plant, even though it was 3 times the conversion efficiency of natural gas to urea that they're presently using. Now, what's that if it's not short-sighted?
Okay. So now let me deal with the other story that I consider an environmental story. And this is on the edge of artificial photosynthesis, which is something that I've been interested in for a while. And the biggest challenge, according to University of Chicago chemist Lynn, is that many people do not realize that even nature has no solution for the amount of energy we use. He says not even photosynthesis is that good, and we have to do better than nature. And so, one of the things that scientists have been pursuing in terms of this doing better than nature is called artificial photosynthesis. Now, the problem is that the chemical equipment in a single leaf is incredibly complex, and it's not so easy to turn it to our purposes. Now, regular photosynthesis produces carbohydrates from carbon dioxide. And what they're trying to do with artificial photosynthesis is to produce fuels like ethanol or methane. And uh, while they're doing this, one of the things they have done is they've made great strides in terms of understanding what is going on. And now they say they have an understanding down at the molecular level, which is going to help them. But when you look at the needs for energy, they say natural photosynthesis will never be efficient enough to supply fuel for us to drive cars. But the trouble with artificial photosynthesis is natural photosynthesis is built to create carbohydrates, and cars and things like that need fuels with more concentrated energy. And
We've just
so,
about lost them, Richard.
anyway, uh, create need more concentrated energy, so they have to re-engineer the process to create more energy dense fuels like ethanol or methane. And the problem when they have to rewire the processes is natural carbohydrate breaks deals with hydrogen, oxygen, carbon compounds to make carbohydrates, and to be able to make fuel instead of doing this stuff. What you have to be able to do is to make CH4 methane, and it's a whole different kind of chemical process than creating these long chain carbohydrates. But now they are making some headway, and what they've done in their particular approach is they tried using some amino acids in the mix. Amino acids are like the proteins that are in their body, and they found out that using these amino acids improves both half of the reaction, the process that breaks apart water and the one that adds electrons and protons to make the methane, and the amino acids help those go more efficiently. And it's efficiently enough that it is 10 times more efficient than the previous best that they could do, but still it has a long way to go. They're saying before it is effective as a large scale producer of fuel, it needs to scale up by, quote, many orders of magnitude. So, though they've made a 10 times improvement in their efficiency, they still have a long way to go. The chemists that are working on this, though, say what they're learning could be applied to other chemical reactions. So many of these fundamental processes are the same. And so if you develop good chemistry, they can be plugged into other systems. So it may be that this kind of research has other benefits that presently they can't see because of these other just general understanding of the chemical processes. So the good news is a 10x improvement in artificial photosynthesis. The bad news is for it to be useful, we have to do a lot more.
And the other thing is, as you mentioned, it's a long distance from lab results to commercial scale results.
No shit.
In the early 2000s, there was a lot of talk about creating bacteria that would create lipids that could be converted into synthetic oil. And Craig Venter, the guy that decoded the DNA molecule, and Exxon partnered in 2009 to develop this genetically modified algae that they'd spread in the ocean. And the algae would create lipids that could be harvested and processed into synthetic oil at a much higher rate per acre than soybeans or palm oil or all this other stuff. And they've been periodically announcing breakthroughs in their work since 2009, but it's 13, 14 years on since then, and they're still 25 years away from commercialization. And this is all the horsepower of Exxon and Craig Venter. So it's a long shot.
It's not an easy problem. However, for me, the son of a friend of mine is a biologist, and he has a company that is using bacteria to make high quality omega-3 oils, and he's selling them as a nutritional supplement. Omega-3 oils sell for a lot more than oil. So he can afford to spend more money on it, but he's had a business for several years synthesizing high quality oils that are used in diet situations. So there are some people who actually are making small successes.
Yeah, and the customers are wealthy people. It's a kind of a niche or a niche market that they're not selling these things to poor people.
Right, omega-3s they're not selling to poor people anyway. When I go to Walmart to buy a bottle of omega-3s, it's more than 1,000 pesos. That's not poor people food.
Yeah, is that the one that comes from fish oil, or is that?
That fish oil is one of the sources for it.
So you could
The
you
problem
could
with fish oil sources is they are contaminated with things like mercury. And
yeah.
generally, you don't want to take poisons in your health food. Anyway, let us continue. The material story this week is about thermoelectric materials, and these are materials that convert heat into electricity. And here a group has developed a new synthetic material that is made out of copper and manganese and germanium and sulfur, and it's produced in a fairly simple process. So it looks like it is a way to make these that will be cost effective and scalable. Thermoelectric materials convert heat into electricity, and they are they think will be particularly useful in industrial processes where there is so much waste heat that is just put into the environment. With these thermoelectric generators, the waste heat can be turned back into energy. And I think of it as kind of like the hybrid car. You're using waste energy, braking energy, to capturing that energy and then reusing it for the process. The thermoelectric devices that they have so far use expensive and toxic elements. What they have done here is a process that uses natural copper-based sulfides, and it's composed of non-toxic and abundant materials. And again, as you read in the details there, they're tweaking these alloys that they're making. They have replaced a little bit of the manganese with copper, and this significantly improved the material's transport properties for electrons and heat. And this material is stable up to 400 degrees C, which is within the temperature range of the waste heat in most energy, in most industries. So it looks very promising. And if you look, 10% of the world's energy is used in industrial processing, and maybe this can reduce that energy to something less than that. You know, a hybrid car gets twice as much gas mileage as a non-hybrid car. Maybe these will get us more mileage from our industrial plants.
How is this stuff used? Like solar panels?
Oh, you would use it, for example, in a smokestack.
Oh, I see.
And
Takes
it
place.
gets hot from the exhaust gases and then generates electricity to run your factory.
Yeah, we've been using these thermoelectric generators for over 50 years. We used
Right.
to use them in the oil business at remote sites to generate small amounts of electricity for instrumentation and communication equipment. And all they really are is like a thermocouple, two differential metals that are
Right.
heated up. And a thermopile is a stack of these thermocouples, zillions of them, and hooked together in series to create a usable amount of electricity, but still really small. And so this is a good idea and good stuff, but it won't create large amounts of power. It's more for small amounts of power in specialized situations. So it's good news.
Again, how much power it can generate still depends on really the cost and efficiency of the material. And
Yeah, and
if you can make it cheap enough, then you can spread it around and get more power.
yeah, and if you could move this 400 degrees Celsius waste heat you're talking about, there's all kinds of uses for it directly, just like for home heating and building heating and laundries and all that sort of stuff. The problem is it's never in the right place that you need it, and it's too expensive to move to where you'd like it.
Mm-hmm.
But we did a project that was using waste heat in a chemical plant to boil ammonia, and then the ammonia ran a turbine that
Mm-hmm.
was hooked to an induction motor and basically pushed power back into the grid, just like photovoltaics would.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing was technically doable. It just wasn't economic. It was cheaper to buy power than it was to go to all its trouble. So
Mm-hmm.
they never did it.
hmm Well, again,
Yes.
that's one of the things that is happening with materials research is they're figuring out ways that, like you were saying, Andrew, it's not a new idea. It's just the way we have been doing it costs too much to be effective. And what they are saying is they have a way to do it that with a material that is much more cost effective. And that's the kind of thing that'll change the curve. Anyway, we'll see. With all of these
When
things
it
that
be,
I'm talking about, they're all future stuff, and we will see.
yeah, and once they become economically attractive, they'll be adopted overnight. I mean,
Fairly
it's,
fast, that's right.
yeah,
That's one of the basis for the kind of nonlinear changes that we are going through in a lot of areas now, is new technologies change the cost curve dramatically. Okay, the next story is the uh, big story this week. I think it may be more than space. Let me get this image up. Artemis launch.
We'll take over commentary coming from the ground of Orion on its launch team. And here we go.
Again, 400,000 gallons of water. Oh my.
Boosters in ignition. Back to the moon and beyond.
Oh, guys.
Two solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
So there we are, and this was now the capsule from it, the Orion spacecraft, yesterday flew around the moon, and this mission will return to Earth in about a month. This Orion spacecraft had dummies in it. It is a capsule like we had gone in before. It doesn't have live humans in it yet. It just has dummies. And this is the first time that a capsule like this has been on the moon in 50 years. And one of the things about this rocket that we saw going up is that it is the most powerful rocket that humans have ever built. It is more powerful by more than 10% by the previous record holder, the Saturn V, and it's about twice as powerful as the SpaceX Falcon Heavy. So it looks like now NASA is saying they're scheduled for the human mission to the moon, I think, is 2025. So they are getting ready for that schedule. And so far, the NASA people are saying of this mission that it is more successful than they ever hoped. So we're going back to the moon, it looks like.
yeah, one of the things, it is a powerful lifting deal, but it's kind of a false false statement to say that it's better than the Saturn V, because the Saturn V had 5 liquid rocket engines under it, each one with a thrust of about 1.6 million pounds. And this Artemis rocket has 4 liquid fueled engines and 2 solid state or solid fueled
Right.
boosters.
Right.
And the solid fueled boosters are typically about 2 million pounds of thrust. And so that would leave about 1.2 million pounds of thrust for each of the other 4 liquid engines. So they actually are smaller than the Saturn V engines, but still it's a terrific achievement, and it's a
And
good way to,
if you talk about total thrust, this has 8.8 million pounds of thrust, just while all of it's firing, of course.
Yeah.
And the Saturn had 7.8 million pounds. That's why I thought it was more.
Yeah, collectively it's more, but the individual rocket
Right.
engines
Well,
are,
sure. That's right.
and
But isn't the Starship a lot more powerful, Andrew?
yeah, the Starship is like the SpaceX Falcon heavy lift. It lifts 5.5 million pounds, and it needs 27 Merlin engines to do that. They have 3 groups of 9 engines to do that. That's the SpaceX one. But this new one that they're coming up with, the SpaceX Starship, it'll lift about the same as the Artemis, but it does it for $10 million per launch versus $4 billion per launch for the Artemis. And one of the reasons the SpaceX one is so much cheaper is that so much of it is reusable,
Right.
where the Artemis is a one-shot kind of deal. But that's not to diminish the Artemis achievement. I mean, going to the moon is a significant thing.
Okay, now the animal story is about crows. And crows are some of the smartest animals in the animal kingdom, and they are capable of doing things like making rule-based decisions and creating and using tools. They seem to know what numbers are, and now researchers report that they're able to understand recursion, which is a process that is deeply embedded in human languages and was long thought to be a uniquely human ability. And recursion is a key feature in language. If you take the sentence, the mouse the cat chased ran, here the clause the cat chased is enclosed within the clause the mouse ran. This is an example of this recursion, and this is a key feature, they think, that set human language apart. But as with a lot of these ideas, when they started to look at it more closely, a few years ago, there was a study of monkeys and human adults with this recursion. I won't go about the details about how they did it, but what they were able to see was these animals, the monkeys, could deal with recursion, and the monkeys were nearly as good at it as, or actually they were a little better at it than 4-year-old children. So the monkeys had good ability. And once the scientists discovered monkeys could do that, other scientists started to wonder about crows. And they tested crows using the same tests that they tested monkeys with, and found out the crows were able to use this recursion as well as the monkeys, but in fact, they used it faster and didn't need to be trained. They could use it automatically without being trained. And so they see mental abilities that they used to think were human and based on language showing up in these animals. They don't know what the animals use it for, because the animals, as far as they know, don't have language with this same attributes as human language. So they don't know why the animals are able to do it, but it looks like they are able to do it. There are, of course, some scientists who say they're not using this skill at all. They're just using associative memory and doing it fine. But the people who are doing this study say that this kind of capacity for this recursive use of the brain is, it looks like if it shows up in 3 different species, widely varied, like the difference between crows and primates or humans or monkeys, then it's convergent evolution, where evolution comes up more than once with some kind of solution to a problem. In cases of convergent evolution, that happens because it's useful. They don't know what it's used for, but they just have to think it is useful. And one of the things that's interesting about this comparison with the crows is birds' brains lack the layers in the neocortex that primates have. So the birds have a very different brain structure, but it looks like they can solve the same kinds of uh, problems and have similar capabilities with a very different brain structure. So they know this means something about brain structures. They don't know what it means, but they know this means something. Brains aren't working like we think they work. And one of the things that I think is also interesting about crows is it turns out there is a correlation between how long animals spend in kind of childhood and being taken care of by their parents and how intelligent they are. Humans, of course, have this long period of raising children. I've heard some people say you're not through raising your children till they're 35. Maybe it's not that bad, but it takes a long time to raise a human. Chickens come to maturity basically in a few weeks. A chicken doesn't have to do much, it just has to peck, and it doesn't take long to peck. Crows, however, don't come to maturity for 2 to 3 years. So they spend a very much longer time being supported by their crow parents and learning about the world from their crow parents. So this is this study is another sign of these crows using more smarts than we think they have.
And, and the idea of language with crows is interesting. There was a program on the Nature of Things TV show a few years ago. And what they did was they had a fellow wearing a mask, like a hockey mask, terrorize these crows. And the crows learned to sound the alarm when this guy with the mask would appear. And then the guy disappeared. Then they didn't do it for another 2 or 3 years. And the grandchildren of those same crows sounded the alarm when they saw a guy with a mask on, even though they'd never seen a mask before. So it suggests that the adult crows were telling the next generation to avoid people with masks, and they had succeeded in doing that over multiple generations.
Yes, that's very interesting.
And another thing they did in a different study was they found that these crows could solve a puzzle to get a meat treat out of a plexiglass puzzle box. And they wouldn't be able to reach the treat with just their own beaks, but there'd be things lying around they could use as tools like pencils and that sort of thing. But the interesting thing was that it would be one crow that would figure it out first, the puzzle, and then a few other crows would see what was happening and copy the first crow. But there were always a few of the crows that never figured it out and never got the treat. And it suggests that there's this bell curve
Yes.
of ability in animals, just like there is in people.
Yes.
And, speaking about the business of the crows telling the people to watch out for the guy with the mask, if I go at our farm, if I go outside the house with just nothing, the crows all stand around and watch what I'm doing and keep an eye on me. But if I go out carrying a shotgun, they all fly off before you can raise the gun. So that suggests that crows tell one another or tell the next generation to watch out for people carrying shotguns.
Yes.
So
Smart birds. Anyway, now to continue with smart, not birds, but smart humans, uh, it turns out something happened to humans about 200,000 years ago, and this is when humans moved from the kind of ancestor Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, the modern humans. And the thing that was surprising that happened about then is the human brain suddenly got twice as big. And that's an enormous change in a relatively short period of time. And scientists and anthropologists have wondered for a long time why that is. And a few years ago, a book was written by a man named McKenna, and the name of the book is The Stoned Ape Hypothesis. And his theory is this, one of the things that us humans have been very good at is wandering around to different places and occupying new places in the environment. And what he thinks brought about this fast mental development is while we were wandering around, we saw these mushrooms growing on cow plops and put them in our mouth and ate them. And these mushrooms on cow plops are psilocybin mushrooms. And the people who take things like psilocybin now report powerful experiences that change their life and change how they look at things and change how they understand the world and themselves. And his theory about why we had this rapid brain development was our early encounters with psilocybin mushrooms. Of course, this doesn't leave any fossils, so everybody just has to be guessing. Some scientists have poo-pooed this idea. Other scientists more recently have come back and are supporting him, and they're saying some say his hypothesis is a totally plausible answer to this long-standing question. And it's what happened to the brain at this time was really extraordinary. And if you look at what was happening at that time, in that same time, it looks like there were cultural impacts of the developments around the world of things like religion and magic and all of these other kind of things that can happen when you start to see things differently in the world, and they can see these developments happening in the material culture at that time. And again, they don't know what happened. They know something happened. And these crazy guys were thinking it's the shrooms.
Well, it's all nonsense what the guy's saying because evolution requires DNA changes or mutations that result in more reproductive success. And if you could imagine that psilocybin resulted in more reproductive success, well, maybe. But there's a more plausible explanation for brain growth, and it comes from a guy, a primatologist named Richard Wrangham, who's written a number of books about anthropology and all this stuff. But his book called Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human, says that learning to cook made for more efficient food usage,
Sure.
and that resulted in smaller guts and more energy available for brain growth and and socializing and all the resulting
Now,
cultural developments that
what you're
would follow.
saying certainly is true about cooking. Now, cooking, though, now they have fairly well established that cooking is about 800,000 years old. So
Yeah.
the cooking development preceded this rapid brain growth by 600,000 years. So
But
they're not exactly contemporary events.
wasn't the rapid grain growth more like 2 million years ago?
No, this was going from Homo erectus to Homo sap. There was a similar period 2 million years ago, but there was a more recent brain growth that was a part of the Homo sapiens.
Okay. Yeah, another thing that really contributed to it may have been bipedalism, walking on your back legs, and the increased balance that's required and things
But
like that.
that's 8 million years old, though.
Yeah, but all of
But
that,
certainly that's been part of it. That
yeah,
changes the dynamics and gives space for the brain to grow on top of the pole of our
yeah.
spine. Okay, the last of the stories is breaking another diet story. I remember during much of my life hearing that we're only supposed to have something like 1 egg a week because eggs were bad for you. Then a few years ago, eggs are good for you and you can have as many as you want. This is a similar story, though, with red meat. And studies have been linking red meat consumption to health problems like heart disease, stroke, and cancer for years, pretty much all of my life. That's what I have heard. But scientists have studied the studies and found that they invariably, they say, suffer from methodological limitations. And now they have reviewed these studies and updated it and cleaned up the data and have found, they only found, they say, weak evidence that unprocessed red meat consumption is linked to colorectal cancer, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and no link at all between eating red meat and stroke. And so the research that was done prior to this, most of it was observational, unable to establish causation, plagued by confounding variables like meat eaters maybe eat fewer vegetables or smoke or exercise less. And the studies are based on self-reported consumption, and people are not very good at accurately reporting what they eat. And the other part is the effect range is pretty small. Most of the studies showed an effect range of 15% or less, and that is a small risk and maybe too small a risk to worry about. And The evidence, they say, for direct vascular or health risk from eating meat regularly is very low, to the point that there is probably no risk. There is, however, more evidence of a health risk from eating too few vegetables, and they think that maybe the health risk that they observed in these diet studies on meat is not because they were eating too much meat, but because they were eating not enough vegetables. So you can have your red meat, you can have your steak, you can have your hamburger. Just remember to eat your veggies too.
Yeah, you want your hamburger all dressed, huh?
That's right.
But the unfortunate thing is red meat is now okay, but red wine is not okay. And it used to be that they said a glass of red wine every day would,
I
that
didn't
could-
realize red wine was not okay. I thought the resveratrol or something was a magic health chemical.
well, now they're saying that any amount of alcohol is
Oh,
toxic.
yeah, any amount of alcohol is a killer. That's okay.
So maybe you can have de-alcoholized red wine, but what would be the
Yeah,
point?
that's right. Well, what I remember reading when I was a young man is studies that showed uh, the health benefits of alcohol improved up to about 2 drinks a day, and over about 4 drinks a day went down. So I have tried to limit myself to a beer and a glass of wine each evening, a glass of red wine. But I have heard the latest stories, and I'm afraid my old long-standing habits get in the way of good sense and health. But I enjoy my beer and wine.
I can't
That's,
disagree with anything you say.
that's ending on a happy note, Richard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's good. And again, it's funny. I have certainly heard this kind of criticism about diet subjects for years, which is, you hear that something is bad for you, and then somebody does a new study, and then it's good for you now. And this is another case like that.
Well, and one good thing is they're still saying that coffee is good for you. Up to 5 cups a day is good.
Yes,
for
that's
you.
right. Excuse me while I
Yeah.
have my coffee, and I do try to limit it to. I can't have 5 cups a day. I can only have about 4.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Of course, Washington grows a lot of red meat.
okay.
That,
Anyway,
not that that influenced their work, but there might have been some influence a little bit.
again, good to see you, friends, and thank you for joining me. And we'll see you next week. And who knows what kind of crazy stories we'll have then.
Okay,
It was
thank
an
you.
Interesting gathering.
Adios.
Okay, adios.